And we are live. G'day everyone, Mike Jeffrey here, and you are listening to My Creative Journey, episode number 41. To all you listeners out there, hello, and thank you so much for taking the time to stop by here today. As I said, my name is Mike, and I'm a photographer, podcaster, and small business owner based here in Sydney, Australia. Each week on the show, I bring you guys along on the highs and lows of my own creative journey and share all the knowledge that I've gained along the road to building my own freelance business. This week's episode, we're going to be talking all about role models and the importance that they can play in you building along your own creative journey and where we should be using them in our own business to try and aspire us to be where we want to be. But before we do that, let's talk about what has been going on for me this past week. And I want to start with the elephant in the room, which is the fact that I got a haircut. After 16 weeks of being in lockdown, we finally came out last week. And the first thing that I went and did was went and got my haircut. I've been really looking forward to that over the past few months. Been the one thing that I really sort of missed out on. I think it was starting to annoy me by the end of it. You guys probably saw, if you you're watching the video version of the podcast, you've probably been seeing my hair grow quite a lot over the past 4 months, and so I was glad to go get that chopped off. I feel like my head is so much more lighter now, and that is really nice. But one thing that hasn't gone away is my moustache. If you guys have been watching the video version of the podcast, you probably noticed the moustache that I've been trying to grow very poorly over the past few months. I started growing that back in August, all for trying to do Movember this year. I tried to do Movember last year, was unsuccessful at that because I started to try and grow my moustache at the start of November. And by the end of the month, I still didn't really have anything obvious. So I started this year in August because we were in lockdown. So that will be something that I'm trying to do next month, but I'll speak about that on next week's podcast. But I thought I would give you guys the update because you probably have had some questions about it if you have been when you're watching the video version of the podcast and you're thinking, what the hell is that happening on my top lip there? But the other thing that I really want to talk about this past week is my calendars. So I spoke about these in last week's episode and about how they were on sale and they would have ended on Monday. I ended up extending them until Tuesday because I had a little bit happening over the weekend and thought it would be good to extend them out by a couple of days because I wanted to give people the opportunity to sort of still have them to be available end of the week, because I didn't really advertise them over the weekend that it was actually closing, and I had a few people message me that they weren't aware that it was closing, so I thought I'd give it a couple more days. And so it really went well in the end. I got quite a few orders, especially in the last few days before it closed. I thought that I normally, most of the time when I go to launch a product, it normally gets most of its traction and most of the orders in the first couple of days. But in this instance, it sort of was the opposite, where it got most of the traction towards the end, just as it was about to close, and a few people were saying that they really wanted to order one. Even a few people messaged me after it closed to say that they really wanted to order one. So that was surprising to me. And I think testament to the fact of why we need to put a time constraint on these sorts of things, because it does create that sense of urgency. And so a lot of people ordering towards the back end because they knew that they may not have a chance a bit later on. And so that is definitely something I spoke about in last week's episode about creating that urgency. And I think that was one of the real drivers to get more people to order, because I think people can tend to feel like they can just hang on forever. But when you do put a time limit on, it can condense more people to order in that shorter period of time. And that's what we saw happen. I did break even on the calendars this year, which if you listen to last year's the episode, I think I did maybe number 15, this podcast. I spoke about my calendars last year and how many of those I sold. Now, I didn't break even on those calendars because I ordered way too many. In this year, I did go with a different supplier for the calendars, but the requirement for going with that different supplier was that I had to order a minimum of 50 calendars. So it was all about trying to make sure that I actually got enough orders to at first break even, but then try to actually make a profit off that. And we have broken even for this year, as opposed to last year where I ordered way too many and I didn't actually sell enough. So didn't actually sell enough to break even of how many I did order, but I ordered them at a higher price last year than how much I ordered them this year. And that's how I was able to bring the price down to actually sell them to you guys through that and be able to bring the price down them, which was really nice, which I think allowed more people to order, because that was one thing that turned a lot of people off last year, was ordering them at the price they were. And I can definitely understand that, and something that I was trying to work on a lot in the orders this year was to be able to bring those prices down. So that was really nice, and really nice to actually break even on those. So that's a project that is out there that I just do for the love of it, and I really enjoy getting my art out there. But it's also nice to break even. I don't want to be sort of losing money on these projects that I enjoy. But at the end of the day, I'm really happy for that. And I want to say thank you to everyone who ordered a calendar out there. I know there was a few of you who listened to this podcast who went through and ordered a calendar. I'm really thankful for that. They should be out in the next couple of weeks. I put the order through on Wednesday, so they should be in a couple of weeks, hopefully in a fortnight, and then they will get sent out in the week after that. So we're looking at early November for those. So that'll be really good, and hopefully we'll get them out a lot earlier this year than last year, because one of the complaints I had last year was that they were too late in the year and they weren't. If you ordered them, you couldn't actually send them off as a gift for Christmas or things like that. So hopefully they'll be out to you guys early November, so you can have them out either end of November or early December if you're looking to get them out there as a Christmas gift. The other thing that I was really reflecting on, I guess, over the past week was the fact that I hit 40 episodes of the podcast, and that never sort of dawned on me until halfway through the week, where I was sort of having a sit down and sort of thinking about a few things of the podcast and sort of thinking about a few of the things in my business and the things that I've really enjoyed this year as we're sort of edging towards the end of October and things are opening back up again, trying to streamline the things that I do and where I should spend my time. And one of the ideas I have all these sort of random ideas, but I was thinking about starting a new podcast, or starting an alternate podcast while still having this one as well, but starting something else in a completely different area. And I was thinking about it in early stages yet. I really haven't looked into that too much. But one of the things that I was trying to do about that was looking at other people who have been in that area that I was interested in. So this would have been in a completely different area that I'm kind of in now. So sort of talking about something else that I'm really interested in. And I was looking about other people who have also got podcasts in that area, because I thought that it may not be a particularly strong area where people are really hosting a lot of podcasts. So I wanted to do my own research and see what else is out there. And in the process of doing that research, I found quite a few podcasts, and most of them sort of were ones started last year in 2020. And that really came as no surprise to me. I think everyone started a podcast in 2020, as far as I'm aware. Everyone who has ever wanted to start a podcast started one last year. So that was something that was unsurprising to me. But what was surprising was the fact that how many of those podcasts aren't still around. How many of them either stopped at the end of last year or only had a few episodes in the beginning. They didn't really have a lot of stuff really going for them. So that was something for me to take away, that not many podcasts sort of push past that sort of 5 episode mark, and really surprising, or whether the intention was only to have a condensed sort of short series of podcasts. And there were a few on there that did say they were only going to be a short condensed series of podcasts where they wanted to talk about strict things and have it sort of evergreen, that it's always there. But some people obviously started with the intent to continue on and continue it every single week, but then just stopped randomly out of the blue. And some people started them last year and sort of stopped as the end of lockdown last year, and then as we went back into lockdown again this year, sort of started them back up again. And so it's easy to see how it's a very time-consuming thing, but also a lot of people aren't prepared for that. A lot of people just have the expectation that it's easy. And that sort of dawned on me, the fact that I've been sort of here for the past 40 weeks recording episodes of this podcast, and we're hoping to push on to 50 episodes by the end of the year, and I was really proud of that achievement. So I just wanted to bring that up and sort of reflect on that, and reflect on, for anyone else out there starting anything, it's not easy to push past that first little bit. It's not easy to push past that first hurdle, but once you get past that, once you build momentum, things do become easier. And for me, each week here, it becomes easier. I know the process, the routine for me has become more streamlined, and I know what it is I do, and I've sort of eliminated those hurdles that were standing in my way in the beginning. Last thing that I want to touch on before we jump into today's topic is today is actually International Stuttering Awareness Day. Now, I want to bring this up because this is something that I haven't really spoken on the podcast about since episode 10. I made a whole episode on my experiences with stuttering back in episode 10. If you guys want to go and have a listen to that one, I would recommend that one. It's a pretty hard one. I went back and tried to listen to it through the week, and it was a pretty hard one for me to listen to. But if you guys are interested in, do feel free. But I just wanted to bring it up in today's podcast because as I'm recording this, it's actually International Stuttering Awareness Day. It isn't as you're listening to this, but it is as I'm recording it. So I really wanted to bring this up and sort of just create a little bit of awareness. I sort of posted a little bit about it on Instagram and wanted to sort of share awareness. It's something that I like to do because I think it's easy for people to ignore it, easy for people to not think that it's a real thing, because a lot of the people, you won't really come across a lot of people who have a stutter because you either won't talk to them or they'll be presenting how I am here, and they've sort of gone through years of training to be at a point where they feel more comfortable. Like for me, having this conversation here by myself, it's very easy for me to speak, as opposed to some of the episodes where I've done interviews with other people. You may have heard in those episodes, it's a lot harder for me to have conversation like that. So I wanted to bring up today that it is a real thing. And so some of the things that you may have heard before are people struggling to get words out, struggling to have conversation, really struggling over certain sort of syllables to get words out. So if it is the case that you come across someone like that, I just want to encourage anyone to sort of give people the amount of time that they need, just to, I think it's just general practice and good skill to have in real life, is just to be a good listener, to other people and just hear what they have to say, hear what they're trying to tell you without interrupting people and without jumping in and making people feel uncomfortable in situations which may already make them feel uncomfortable as is. Just because you may find a situation easy doesn't mean that anyone else necessarily finds it easy in their day-to-day life. And I think that is just good practice for any sort of thing, is just to learn to actually listen to other people and listen to what they have to say. Because most of the time when you actually listen to someone, they will express themselves and they will actually be a lot more comfortable and be able to present themselves. Because I think a lot of people think that stuttering revolves around people either being nervous or shy, and that's not really the case. It's not the case that they're just always nervous or always shy around other people. It's actually a biological and neurological condition that they can't push past. And whilst being nervous may exacerbate or make that worse, doesn't necessarily mean that that's a root cause. So don't just necessarily think that they're just being shy around you, because it's probably something that they struggle with all the time. So by you being open to having conversation, open just listening to what people have to say, makes them feel a lot easier to speak to someone when they're not always confronted with it straight up. So that often breaks down that barrier and makes it feel a lot easier when those nerves do start to creep in, because it is a very challenging situation. So I just wanted to raise a bit of awareness on it about today. If you do want to hear more about the things that I've gone through, do go back and listen to episode number 10. I'll probably make another episode on it again next year, but I just wanted to create this bit of awareness. And I really wanted to use this episode because I've spoken about it in the past, probably 2 episodes. I think I spoke about it in episode 39 about wanting to condense the editing time on these podcasts. For me, I spend a lot of time editing these podcasts because I'm often anxious about what I'm going to say. So I end up chopping out a lot of stuff. If I make mistakes, I go back and edit them all. But I want to leave this episode to be unedited. I think having that constraint on myself really helps. I know it can sometimes be a bit of a hindrance in thinking that trying to put too much pressure, but I'm at a stage now where I feel a lot more comfortable to speak here without feeling like I need to edit everything out, edit every silence, edit every mistake out. So I'm going to leave this episode as is and sort of use it as an example of how I really sit down here, because I think I haven't been giving the real version of myself always on this podcast, because I have been editing a lot of things out. And so I just really want to be able to have that out there in the world and show people that it isn't easy for anyone to sit down here and record a podcast. It's not easy for anyone to have a conversation, but I want it to be as open and honest. And I've always tried to do that in business as well. So try to show you guys the real behind the scenes of things. So I want this podcast to be as real as it possibly can be. And I think moving forward, that's the easiest way to, for me to continue this podcast through, is to make it as much of my genuine self as I possibly can. Because if you ever get to a point where you feel like you have to have a persona or have to sit down and become someone else to be able to do something, that is when things can become tedious, and eventually you will get to a point where you don't want to do that anymore, and you're going to forget, and you're going to sort of get to a stage where it all becomes too hard because you're not being your true self. So I always want to present in that way, and hopefully by just allowing these episodes to flow, it will become a lot more in that style moving forward. But yeah, my main takeaway for today, guys, is really just to allow yourself to actually listen to other people, and just anyone in day-to-day life, anyone you're having a conversation with, try not to interrupt them when you're having a conversation with them. I don't think that's really overly good practice for anyone, let alone people who struggle with speaking. So just make sure that you're giving people the time of day and actually listening to what other people have to say. But with that out of the way, let's jump into today's episode, which is all about the idea of role models. Now, this idea I had actually came from the book. Actually came from the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, book by Robert Kiyosaki, that I actually listened to the audiobook of a couple of weeks ago, and I haven't done a book club on this podcast in a couple of weeks. If you guys are interested, I actually listened to Rich Dad Poor Dad a couple of weeks ago. I actually finished Atomic Habits the end of last month as well, the end of September. It's October now. I finished that at the end of September, and I'm currently listening to Your Man's Search for Meaning at the moment, and also reading the book Quiet. So those are some of the things that I've been reading. But if you guys are interested, I will probably share more about that in the next couple of weeks. But as I was listening to the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, this idea came about of the idea of role models, and something that I hadn't thought about specifically in terms of your business and things like that. Now, he sort of gave the comparison of a role model in business and why we don't have them as adults, why we don't have role models as adults, and people tend to push away from that idea of having role models as adults, as opposed to when we're children, that we actually do have a lot of role models, whether that be in sport, in movies, in your favorite TV shows, as musicians, things like that. We're happy to have role models as children. And that sort of struck a chord with me, because I thought about myself as being that type of person when I was younger, especially still up until probably a few years ago, that I would have had a lot of role models in areas that I wasn't particularly interested in. I feel like we've always had those sort of role models in movies or in sports. I know for myself, I can name a fair few people in sports that I would have really looked up to. So I was a big fan of cricket. I was a big fan of cricket when I was younger, and so I could have probably named off everyone who played in the Australian team and all their stats and all their averages and like how old they were, where they were born, all different types of things like that. But as we become an adult, we don't sort of resonate with that, with other things that we want to do in our lives, and why we don't sort of try to have those role models. But I think for me, it didn't really strike me as the fact that we need to have role models and we need to know everything about those different people. But I think it's good to have someone to emulate, someone to sort of follow, someone to walk in their footsteps. Because for me, when it was sort of based around sport, when it was based around movies, if I wanted to try and improve in my own sport, like as I was playing on the weekend as a kid, you would have someone who you looked up to and you would try and emulate them. You would try to go about the style of sport, how they were playing it. You would look at them and think how they got there, and you would try and emulate what they did to get there in order for you to improve. But as we become adults, it's not always as easy to emulate your style after someone who has become successful in the industry that you're in. And I think there is an importance in that. And I think that there is a reason why people become successful. And so if we are learning from them, if we're studying from them and emulating what they do, I think that's the best way in order to have success. And that's one of the few things that he said in the book, is that the easiest way to become successful is to learn from people who already are successful, and to learn what they did to get there, and sort of try to emulate that as best as you possibly can. And that really struck a chord with me. So I wanted to really speak on it quickly in today's episode and sort of give a brief overview, and hopefully it can help some of you guys and sort of make you think, because it made me think about who my role models are and who I'm aspiring to be and who I'm looking up to, and why it is I don't sort of do more research into these people, and why it is I don't sort of emulate as much of their lives as I possibly could, because there are other people who I probably know a lot about, whether it be in sport or in movies and music, who I would know more about than actual your role models in my own industry. So that is just something that I wanted to bring up. And it really sort of hit me in the stage of me on this podcast, for example. This is just one of few examples that I thought about, but I thought it could be relevant, and I thought some people could take something away from this. I thought about my podcast and why I don't hire someone else to go edit this podcast, right? So I record this podcast every single week, and I then have to go and sit down and edit the podcast. Now, I've been thinking about for quite a long time if I should get someone else to edit the podcast, because editing the podcast is not something that I particularly enjoy. You know, the whole reason I do a podcast is not to edit podcasts, because that's not the part that I enjoy. I enjoy having these conversations. I enjoy being able to connect with people. I enjoy being able to educate other people on ideas that I've had and the journey that I've been on. So that is the real part of actually podcasting that I enjoy. But the whole part of editing actually takes longer, probably, than the whole preparation stage of recording this podcast, preparing ideas and all that sort of stuff. So why don't I outsource it? And the real reason behind that probably comes down to the fact that it's expensive to get another person to actually edit the podcast for you, and you have to actually go hire them to do it. It would take a few hours, have to spend that sort of money. But then if you look up to other people with podcasts, why don't, if that's the case, if that's the main reason, why doesn't every successful podcaster edit their own podcast? If that's the way it should be, if that's the way they go about it. Well, when you look at successful podcasters, more often than not, they're not editing their own podcast. As they get to that success, successful level, they're probably not editing their own podcast. And they may have been in the beginning, but towards the end, as they're trying to push through to become a more successful podcast, what's the first thing they do? They outsource their editing. And why do they do that? Because they're aware that 2 and 3 hours is more valuable to them in time than it is in your money and the expense that will actually go into hiring someone else. And this is something that I weigh up all the time in thinking that having to think about what would someone else do? What would someone who is successful, what would they do in this position? Because if I'm not emulating them, if I'm not doing the things that they would do, then how can I ever expect to be there? So for me, if it is a case where I take an hour to record this podcast, I take an hour to maybe 2 hours in planning, but then I take 3 hours to edit, that's a whole day. And if I have a whole day a week, then that's great. But if I don't, if I can use that other half day where I could be editing on something else to make me more money or to improve my business in some other way, then that is probably a lot better of an option for me. And it has been obviously shown through other people and other people who I should be looking up to and trying to see what they're doing, because they're all doing that as well. And anyone who has that successful sort of podcast is probably doing that as well. And that was one of the things that I just was happening to think about through the week, because it was the first example that sort of came to my head, because over the past couple of weeks, it's been one of the things that has been sort of dragging me down is the editing of this podcast. And so, as I said, one of the main things was to try and not edit as much stuff out. I think that sort of decreases the editing time it sort of takes for me, but also the actual having to go and do it does take a lot of time. And so thinking about what would someone else do in that position? What would someone who has a more successful podcast than me, what would they do? What did they do to get to a point where they are able to become successful? And it probably is outsourcing that. And their whole mentality around it isn't that it will be more expensive, it's that their time is more valuable than how expensive that would be. And so why don't we do this in other aspects of our business as well? We can do this in all different types of things. And I think that is the most important thing, is to be able to find a role model, find someone who inspires you, find someone who you aspire to be, and try to do what they do. I don't think it's a bad thing to try and emulate other people who have been successful in your industry and done good things, because at the end of the day, if it helped them to get there, I think it's an important thing, and it probably can actually teach you something about how you should get there as well. I think pretending to be like other people is a great way, and you can try to almost fake it till you make it, almost fake it till you make it sort of thing. And I've said this before, I've spoken about this in multiple different episodes in the start of my own business, and trying to fake it till I make it in the sense of my own business, and trying to put out that sort of facade that I've already become successful, because that's what successful people do. They don't sit back and wait for someone to give them the permission to go and do something. They just go and do what they want to do. So by trying to make that the presence that you have, and trying to prove to yourself that you are able to get to that point and try to emulate someone else, is the best roadmap, I think, to take into trying to get to the position that you want to do. I think this really does sort of two things: emulating someone else in aspiring to be like them, emulating what they do. I think that really does two things. And I think the first one is, I think your more obvious position is it gives you a clear roadmap. I think for me, in the beginning, one of the hardest things about starting in business or starting in any sort of creative endeavor is not having that roadmap. There's no sort of paved out way. For a lot of people in a lot of different careers, there's a paved roadmap of things they need to do. There's a career progression. They know what they've got to do. But in most creative careers, there's not always that. There's not always that in any sort of your business either. Technically, if you want to start your own business, there's no direct way you have to go about that. You can go about that multiple different ways. So having some sort of roadmap, I think, is super important. And if you can look up to someone else and see what they've done, and if it's helped them to be successful, then you can sort of be able to guide yourself on that way. And that's not to say there is only one correct way to go about it, because there are multiple people, hundreds of thousands of people out there who are successful in all different types of areas, and they've all probably gone about it in different ways. But the way that they've gone about it has been successful. So we can learn something from that. And if we don't exactly emulate that one person, we can try and grab little bits and pieces from different people and see how we can mold those into our own lives. And in a way, it gives us more certainty that what we're trying to do is the right thing because it's helped them to get there. But then on the other foot, it then also helps having that roadmap, but then it also helps to show you that that is able to be done. I think that is one of the most important things to get over that self-doubt, that psychological barrier that says that it's never been done before, so I can't be the first one to go through it. And having someone else who's been there before certainly helps. It helps. It's groundbreaking in the way that that can help you, motivate you to get a lot further than you probably would have gone had you not known about that person before. I think it can go the opposite way when you can see too many people and you can see it's oversaturated. You can think that everyone's in that path. And in the early days, I think, especially me as a photographer, I could think that there are so many photographers out there. Everyone wants to be a photographer these days. So you can feel overwhelmed and feel like there's too many people out there, there's too much competition, and you're never going to be able to get anywhere with that because there's too many people already in that industry. So you've got to try and make your own path and get somewhere yourself because it's going to be really hard to sort of break through there, and you can sort of fall away because you think that it's all too hard and there's too many people out, there's too much competition. Or it can go the other way, as I said, if you're one of the early trailblazers in one particular area, if you don't have someone to aspire to, it can become really hard as well. If you don't see anyone else sort of taking your path, you can either think that it's too hard because why isn't there anyone else here trying to do what I'm doing? Why haven't I found anyone else who's tried to do it this way? Maybe it's the wrong way to go about it. So having someone else who's already done it, already gone along some sort of similar path to you, I think is super important in helping you overcome your own self-doubt in thinking that it's able to be done, because obviously it's able to be done because there's someone else who's done it here. If you've got multiple examples from different areas, people have done it all over the place, and finding that person and researching what they did often helps you to think, oh, I'm actually on the right track here. I'm actually doing the right things. If I do X, Y, and Z, I can probably get there as well. Yes, the things they did were hard and they probably had to work hard to get there, but it still shows you that it can be done. And I think that's one of the most important hurdles to jump over in the beginning, in thinking that what it is you're trying to do is unsuccessful or unachievable in that way, because I think most of the things are achievable, but it's about you actually knowing that there's someone else out there who's done it before you really helps you and helps you to grow long term. And we're back. If you did notice the little bit of a cut in the video there, that's because I have to actually stop recording on the camera because I can only record for half an hour at a time, actually 30 minutes at a time. So any podcast episode that goes over 30 minutes, I've got to stop the camera halfway through and restart it again to record the second half of the podcast. Unfortunately, that is another one of the downsides of recording a video podcast, is that I can't just record for the whole hour if I do go for anything over half an hour. So that is one of the reasons why I would like to go for under half hour per episode, but it isn't always the way. So I do have to stop the camera and restart it again, but you wouldn't hear it in the audio version. So that is pretty easy to jump over. And now the next thing that I really want to jump into is the whole creative aspect of this. Now, how does this help in a creative field? I think not only in your business and things like that and driving you forward, which often can be the hardest things to emulate because they're not as widely known about, and how people actually made strides in their business, and that's not often well documented. So hard to emulate something that you don't know much about. But in a creative sense, in terms of creating artwork for yourself and creating things or actual products that you want to sell and things for yourself, is in the early stages, and I think I've spoken about this before, is to actually find someone whose art you really like. Find someone who's trying to do something in a field that you really enjoy. And you can do this in any field, and finding someone who you really look up to, you really like their work, and try and emulate that. Now, I'm not saying that you just steal their artwork. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that you try to reproduce it as best you can. You don't need to go and advertise that. You don't need to go and use that on your website. You definitely wouldn't go and actually sell that work if you were able to reproduce it, because there's obvious issues there. But one of the big skills that this helps in is actually being able to produce work. You don't have to actually go and sell the work to try to work on it. You can work your best to try and emulate someone else's work, and their exact artwork is the best way to go about that. If you're an artist, if you're a drawer, if you're some sort of your musician, if you're a videographer, you're a graphic designer, you can work in different areas and try to copy other people's artwork that they've done before. And a lot of people have been very successful at this because they've been able to gain a lot of skills. And this is the one thing that a lot of artists struggle with in the beginning, is having a lot of creative ideas, but not knowing how to get there, not knowing the skills to actually get them there. And when you start any creative field, you won't have the skills that anyone has had who's been in the industry for, X amount of years. You obviously aren't going to start off with those amount of skills, but the way to learn those skills is to practice. And the best way to practice in the beginning is to find a style or find an artist that you like and try and emulate their work. And through that process of emulating their work, you will come across a lot of things. You will really have to troubleshoot a lot of the things that you've actually had to run into in thinking, how do I produce this? How do I go about this? Do I have to learn a new skill? Is there a new piece of software that I need? Is there a new piece of equipment that I need to get this done? And through learning that, you'll gain a lot of skills. You'll have more tools in your tool belt, so that when you get to the point that you actually want to produce something for yourself, it's going to become a lot easier because you've got all these tools now that you can put those all together and you can take pieces from all over the joint and put them together to actually make a piece for yourself. So if you're like a musician, if you're trying to emulate one particular song from someone else, if you're trying to actually produce that song for yourself, you'll gain a lot of skills in being able to tweak small little things that you may not have initially thought about to get that right. And then you can use that little skill in something else, and if you're doing that for multiple different artists across multiple different songs, you've gained a lot of skills, a lot of tools in your repertoire to use in your own artwork later on down the track. And this is something that I've used a lot before, and I used a lot in the beginning of my artistic career, was really looking up to other artists and thinking about how I could possibly create work that they're creating, because I really like their style. I love what they're doing in their own work, and thinking, how can I possibly get there? How can I produce the work that they're producing? And I didn't initially know how. I didn't know what I was trying to do, but sort of breaking their work down step by step and thinking, how can I go from not having anything to producing what they've got? And you've got the best way to get there is by having the end product and working back and sort of working out different things and reverse engineering how to get there. And through that process, you'll learn skills, but you also learn them in a hands-on way that you're more likely to remember later on, in not just thinking and not just reading about and learning and studying what it is they did. You'll actually be having a hands-on your reconstruction of what they did and learning those skills along the way. And I think that's super important for any type of art, or any type of artist who's trying to produce skills and sort of learn and grow their own skills in the beginning. I think super important, because we take that creative element out, yes, but that helps us in the long term to grow more skills, so that later on when we have creative ideas, we know how to execute on them, because that is all it is in trying to be able to build up more tools in your tool belt. And that's the reason why artists become successful, is because they know how to do things without having to look them up. Yes, we can go and look them up every single time, but if you know how to execute on something, if you know how to troubleshoot on the job, then you're going to be much more successful in the long term, because you've had those skills and had that practice beforehand. And that's why someone with X amount of years experience is worth more than someone who hasn't had any experience before, is because of that. They've had that learning, they've had those skills, they've learned on the job, they know how to overcome those obstacles when they do arise. And I think that's super important in the beginning, to have someone you look up to, so we can sort of grow and sort of learn from them. And not saying you have to steal their style, not saying you have to steal any of their artwork that they've previously done before, but using those skills and using them from heaps of different areas and heaps of different inspirations from different places, and using those in your creative journey. Excuse me. And then the next thing that I want to talk about is sort of against, we sort of had that your business idea, we sort of had the creative idea and creating things and sort of using it and having inspiration in your business end of your business, I guess, and then having the artistic end of your business. But then also the other part of it is your environment. And I spoke about this on Instagram through the week, and I spoke about how one of the most beneficial things for me in my career was actually moving the environment that I was in, changing the environment to best suit what I was trying to do. Now, most successful people sort of revolve in the same sort of circles, and there's a reason for that, because the energy of other people, the inspiration that they gain from each other, helps to drive them up. So if you're in an area, if you're in an environment that's not conducive to those sort of things, to those skills, to those ideas, then it's going to be really hard to grow. It's going to be hard to grow when other people are sort of holding you back, when the energy around you, when the other people aren't speaking your language. So maybe try to get into one of those environments where creative people are, where successful people are. Try to surround yourself with those types of people. And they may not have to be the most successful people ever, but they just have to be people who are trying to do the same things you're trying to do. So if you're trying to be an artist, for example, there's a reason like all actors end up in America. There's a reason why all actors end up in there's a reason why all actors end up in Hollywood. There's a reason why all actors end up in Hollywood, because they're surrounded by a lot of different people. Yes, all the tools and the studios and everything is there, but there's a reason why anyone aspiring would move there, because they're trying to get surrounded by the right types of people. If you're trying to become anything in any creative industry, you got to surround yourself by the right types of people in order to grow in that area. And I think that's super important. An environment plays a much larger role than a lot of people first think. And that is super important in being able to produce quality results and produce your mental state, because that plays a big part in it, rather than just your actual skills. You can have all the skills in the world, but if you haven't got the right mental state, if you don't know what it is you're trying to do, if you're not learning from the right people, then it's going to be very hard to become successful. So creating an environment where it's okay to become successful, where it's actually looked up upon, where other people are looking up towards you, because you're all bringing each other up. And that is one of the biggest things that I think that you can really do in your career is to surround yourself by other creative people, other people who are like-minded to you, in order to bring yourself up. And it's definitely one of the biggest things that I've done, and one of the biggest things that ever came from me was actually surrounding myself by other people and opening myself up to experiences that I didn't think were true. This goes back to what I was talking about before, in saying that it's very hard to think you can get somewhere if you've never seen anyone be there before. So surrounding myself with new people, all of a sudden I've opened myself up to so many other experiences from a lot of different things that I didn't even know were possible before. So surrounding myself by those people isn't just a whole mental thing. It's that being able to learn from them and learn from mistakes they've made, but learn from things they've done before, and actually show myself that I can be there as well, because other people have gone down that path and it's worked for them and they've been successful in that area that I may not have been exposed to before. And if you don't know that anyone else has been there before, it's hard for you to know that it's even an option, let alone be trying to be able to move down that path. And I think this really goes back on why I have such a problem with people being closed off, people who tend to other people who tend to not be as open with their ideas, people who tend to not be as open with sharing how they got to where they are. And I think for me, it's always so important, and I try and be as open, as transparent as I possibly can, because everyone had to get somewhere somehow. And I don't really care how anyone else got to where they are. I'm just really interested in how they got to where they are. I would really like to know, and I think there's a lot of learning that comes through that. So people who are closed off and don't share how it is that they got to where they are, I think that is a big detriment to them, because it shows what type of person they are. It's that scarcity mindset where we think that if we tell people how we were able to become successful, then they're going to become successful too, and I'm no longer going to be successful. So if your business or if your sort of creative journey is that fragile that by sharing it with someone else, they're going to outdo you, so you're no longer going to be performing at the level that you are, then you're probably not at that level anyway, and you're in the completely wrong mindset that you aren't ever going to be anywhere if you're never going to share where or how it is you got there. Because to you, if you believe in it that much, that's how you got there, it shouldn't really matter what other people do, because the actual thing that stands you apart isn't the fact that you've worked out how to get there, isn't the fact that you worked out how to get there, because at the end of the day, everyone's going to work it out eventually, and other people are trying to create their own paths. So there are people who would go about it multiple different ways. So it doesn't really matter about how you got there. It's the drive and the skill and the actual your work ethic that you had to get there. Like, you may know something, you may know very well that if you go do X, Y, and Z, you'll get here. But the actual people that go and execute on that are very few and far between. So it has nothing to do with the fact that you worked out how to get there. It's the fact that of everything you have upstairs to be able to get yourself to that position. So people who are too closed off, I don't think have the right mindset in that way. And I don't really like that in other people. So I think surrounding yourself by a community of people, an environment of people where you're willing to share, and people who are all trying to help each other up, because I think that is the best way at the end of the day. And whilst I don't think anyone's going to be out there stealing exactly what I've done, I think learning from it is amazing, and learning from me, but also learning from other people. I would never just learn from one person. I'd try to learn from as many possible people as I can, because it's all about that environment and about trying to create as many different people and as many different role models as you possibly can. And so I just want to close this episode out by sort of asking you guys to reflect on who's your role model, who is someone you look up to, who's someone you're looking up to in your creative journey, in your own business, in your small business, in your own your life in general. I think far too often we can have role models in areas that aren't sort of irrelevant to things we want to do, but we don't have role models in areas where things we actually would like to do. And I think that is a flaw. I think you can have role models in areas that are maybe a bit unpopular, a bit outside of the norm of what all your friends and family may have role models in. They may aspire to be like an actor, or like anyone who they see on TV, a musician, things like that. But it's okay to have role models that other people you may never have heard of before. It's okay to aspire to be like them, because at the end of the day, if that's a successful person in an industry you're interested in, then chances are they've done something to get where they are today, and you should probably be trying to emulate them a little bit as well. So the fact that other people don't know about them is at the end of the day irrelevant, because they're not trying to get there, but you can have a little bit of an interest in them. And I would say that if you don't have one at the moment, that's fine, but try to, over the next couple of weeks, have a think about that, and have a think about who it is who inspires you. And maybe it is you need to do a bit more of your research into them. Maybe it is you need to, if it's just a friend you have on Instagram, if it's a friend you have in real life, maybe have a conversation with them. Ask them a couple of things and try to use them as inspiration and use them to guide you along your path moving forward. But I hope this episode was helpful, guys. I hope you gained something from this. I hope you gained a new insight, a new perspective, hopefully, on something, because as I said at the start, this was something that really sort of struck me, and I really was impacted a lot by it. So I wanted to share it with you guys, and hopefully it's a new way of thinking about things and thinking that it's okay to have role models, and really the importance of having role models in your life as well. And I think it's really important, and there's a lot of evidence to show behind that, how if you are to emulate someone who is already successful in your industry, how that's probably the easiest way to be able to get there for yourself, and trying to have your multiple different people who you look up to is a really good thing, and is never going to hurt you at the end of the day. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this episode. If you did enjoy this episode, I would really appreciate it if you did share this episode around with other people who you also may think may be interested in this. Anyone who is looking to start their own business, is on their own creative journey, trying to make more of these episodes around people starting creative journeys and their own creative businesses as well. So if you guys know anyone who would be interested in listening to this podcast, I would really appreciate it. And I've been getting a few new listeners over the past couple of weeks, and I really appreciate that. And I know it's from you guys sharing it around with other people. And so I want to say thank you, and I would really appreciate it. And I always do appreciate when any listeners, you do send me a message and actually reach out, because as I said, I'm an open book, and I like to be able to share the successes that I have had so far, and also some of the failures as well, because I think that is often you're not spoken about enough. And I think that as much as we can educate on that as possible, I think it only helps everyone else to grow. And that is the aim of the game here at the end of the day. And with that said, guys, I hope you all have a great week. I really appreciate you being here this week. And remember, just to take a little bit more time this week, take time to actually listen to other people. Take time to listen to what people are saying to you, and don't immediately assume something of someone the first time you speak to them, and take time just to listen to people. Actually have a conversation with a friend, have a conversation with someone else, and take time to actually listen to what they're having to say. And I think that is good practice in life, and I think that will help a lot of different people out there in the world. But until next week, guys, I hope you have a great week, and I will speak to you all again next Monday. Bye.